The 12th Annual Frank and Coffin Lecture on Law and Public Service. This lecture is always the high point of the academic year at the University of Maine School of Law. It is also an honor for me to have the opportunity to present to you our distinguished lecturer, Scott Harshbarger, and to introduce as well Judge Frank and Coffin, the distinguished jurist and public servant for whom this lecture is named. Scott Harshbarger and I thought that we would like to deliver our remarks from up here, but with his characteristic modesty, Judge Coffin declined. We're also pleased this evening to welcome the family members of Judge Coffin, Mrs. Ruth Coffin, Judge Coffin's wife, as you all know, and their children, Meredith, Susan, and Douglas. And also the many of Judge Coffin's clerks who as a group have been so instrumental in making this lecture series a reality. We're thrilled not only to have our Judge Coffin's main clerks, but also a number of people from the Boston area who've come this evening. The University of Maine School of Law takes great pride in its sponsorship of the annual Coffin Lecture. The lecture reflects and celebrates the law school's strong and abiding commitment to public service, and it challenges all of us each year to consider new ways to ensure that the law and the legal profession continue to serve the public good. The law school has a long record of public service to Maine, to New England, and to the nation, and we think that this lecture series is one of those. Since its inception in 1992, under the administration of my predecessor, Don Zillman, who was dean then, the Coffin Lecture has brought to our community an array of extraordinarily talented and thoughtful individuals. Each of our 11 previous Coffin lecturers who are listed in your program has challenged us to reflect in new ways upon the powerful intersection of law and public service. And there is no doubt in my mind that Mr. Harshbarger will continue in that fine tradition. We have enjoyed our conversations over the last months about this event. For those of you who are new, Coffin lecturers are selected by a committee composed of faculty, students, and former clerks of Judge Coffin. The committee looks for distinguished individuals who are exemplars of a life devoted to law and dedicated public service. And Scott Harshbarger clearly fits the profile. His career has blended law and public service in many varied contexts. In the private practice of law, in government service, in public advocacy, and in academia. A native of Pennsylvania, and I learned this evening the son of a minister, Mr. Harshbarger is probably why he wanted to be up there. Mr. Harshbarger graduated in 1964 from Harvard College, where he was not only a fine student, but also a nationally regarded halfback. He is, in fact, the only person I have ever actually met who appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated. After graduation from Harvard College, he went to Harvard Law School in 1968. After that, he entered the private practice of law with the Boston firm of Goodwin, Procter, and Hoare. But the call to public service was strong, and in 1970, he took a position as head of the Criminal Justice Project of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights in Boston. His career in public service continued through the 1970s, during which time he served as Deputy Chief Counsel of the Massachusetts Public Defenders, as Chief of the Public Protection Bureau of the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office, a position he described to me as a public interest law firm within government. And then, after a stint in the AG's office in Massachusetts, he served as General Counsel of the Massachusetts State Ethics Commission. In 1983, Mr. Harshbarger was elected as District Attorney of Middlesex County in Massachusetts, serving in that position until 1991, when he was elected as Massachusetts Attorney General. As Attorney General for 8 years, Scott won national recognition for his work in civil rights and hate crimes enforcement, prosecution of white-collar crime and insurance fraud, and enforcement of child labor laws. He also led the passage of brownfields legislation, which helped spur economic development in formerly depressed neighborhoods. As president of the National Association of Attorneys General, he was one of the first attorneys generals in the nation to sue tobacco manufacturers to recover smoking-related health care costs. In 1999, after running for governor of Massachusetts, and unsuccessfully, sorry. I don't know why. Mr. Harshbarger was elected president of Common Cause, the nonpartisan citizens lobby. In that role, he guided the organization's efforts to support federal campaign finance reform legislation, commonly known as the McCain-Feingold legislation. He expanded Common Cause's agenda to include election reform and launched its corporate governance initiative. He stepped down as president of Common Cause in 2002 and returned to the private practice of law at the Boston firm of Murphy, Hess, Toomey, and Lehane, where he was focusing on corporate governance issues. Mr. Harshbarger has served on numerous nonprofit boards, including the Board of Trustees of Union Theological Seminary, the Steering Committee for the American Public Health Association, and the Board of the Epilepsy Foundation. Over the years, he has taught legal ethics at Boston University Law School and served as a visiting professor at both Harvard and Northeastern Law Schools. The recipient of many honors, just last week he was awarded the first annual CJR Justice Award, which was presented at the 125th anniversary celebration of the Boston organization Community Resources for Justice. This provides a summary of some of Scott Harshbarger's many accomplishments. But as you all know, who have been here before, the real introduction, the one that deepens our understanding of our Coffin lecturer, will be given, as it always is, by another exemplar of a life devoted to law and public service, the individual for whom this lecture is named, Judge Frank M. Coffin. For many of us in this room, Judge Coffin needs no introduction at all. But for the sake of our law students and others who may be new to this lecture, I will provide a very brief one. Judge Coffin is one of the small, select group of public servants who has served with distinction in all three branches of our government. In Judge Coffin's case, as a congressman, U.S. congressman, in the executive branch as the deputy administrator for the Agency for International Development, and in the judiciary. First appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit in 1965, he served as its chief judge from 1972 to 1983. He assumed senior status with the court in 1989, but as we all know, who know him well, that's hardly being in senior status. In addition to having hearing cases by assignment, he is also hard at work at his memoirs and continues to give generously of his time and his prestige to ensure access to justice for all citizens. Judge Coffin has completed yet another important project this year on behalf of the public interest, guiding as co-chair of the ABA's Commission on Loan Repayment and Forgiveness, a study on the impact of rising law school debt on the ability of law graduates to enter careers in public service. The Commission's report and its recommendations are already having an impact in terms of renewed attention to this very important issue. A graduate of Bates College and Harvard Law School, Judge Coffin is the author of 4 books and numerous articles. He holds honorary degrees from Bates, Colby, Bowdoin, and the University of Maine. And in 2001, how old I am, I think it's still 1900s, Judge Coffin was the recipient of the most prestigious award a federal judge can receive, the Edward J. Devitt Award for Distinguished Service to Justice. Although he is a graduate of Harvard, he has been a wonderful friend of Maine law, supporting and guiding us and our students in many ways for many years. As I say every year, and I say it because it is true, one of the greatest pleasures of my deanship has been the opportunity to work with Judge Coffin and to see this gentle, brilliant, and witty man in action up close. It is a testament not only to our lecturer, but also to the awe and affection in which the legal community his clerks, and name law hold him, that all of you are here this evening on a night when our almost equally beloved Red Sox are trying to battle their way into the World Series. We'll see. It is my honor and my great privilege to present to you our very own MVP, the Honorable Frank Coffin.
For your very touching remarks. At this point, I'm going to break with tradition. And before I continue with the pleasant task assigned to me of introducing our lecturer, I want to bring up another subject briefly. It concerns the dean of this law school and her conduct. I thought it important enough to bring it before this audience without, for a change, running it by the dean. Now, first we understand what a dean does. He, and in this case, she, is the person in a school which does all the work nobody else wants to do, but everybody desperately needs. And so our dean is always arranging, planning, and pushing, promoting, introducing, involving, and praising others. I propose we stop for a moment and reflect on what and who we have and take for granted. Now, there are awards and awards. One that is particularly meaningful is the Margaret Brent Women Lawyers of Achievement Award, given by the American Bar Association for Women in the Profession. This year they gave it to only 5 women in the whole country. The inquiry is one of the 5 and joins former Coffin lecturers Wall and Justice Ginsburg. There are 150 or more law schools in the country. Many of them have women deans. Harvard and Northeastern have been mentioned. They have women deans, but our dean got the Brent Award. In a formal citation, the ABA recognized her lawyering skills, intellect, dedication to using the law to help solve social problems, and not least, the example she sets for others of melding a successful career in the law with service to the community and a rich family life. In short, I would have to say that at the rate she's going, she may someday merit consideration as a Coffin lecturer. Now, that's not so funny. Now, this brings me down to an equally pleasant task. This lecture series has been singularly fortunate in having persons who are outstanding symbols of public service in the law. We've had lawyers, professors, appointed and elected officials, and judges from state and federal courts and from the Supreme Court. Each of these people had carved out his or her own plot in the public service vineyard, in, for the most part, a highly focused career, ranging from fighting the death penalty to fighting discrimination against the disabled. But tonight we hear from one whose many-faceted career, as outlined by Dean Corey, demonstrates that although roles and foci change, public service can find a place in all of them. Indeed, it makes me think that Scott Harshbarger has from the beginning considered his real career in public service and has merely been dressing it up in different clothes. What intrigues me is what lies behind this fascinating facade. From largely public sources, including a Boston Globe profile, I've been able to gain a few insights. We begin with our speaker swimming in a swimming pool, in a community pool with several cousins, but swimming only very briefly. This was 1953, a year before Brown versus the Board of Education, and the attendant had shied away a black youth staying with the Harshbargers. Scott's father, chaplain at Penn State, World War II conscientious objector and fervent seeker of social justice, wasted no time in ordering the kids out of the pool, and if this is racism, that is wrong. Next piece of evidence is a vignette from our speaker as remembered by his Harvard classmates, and I quote, "Half-fast Scotty Harshbarger, carrying football, knees churning, arms pumping, carrying would-be tacklers with him as he charged for the goal line." That line about carrying would-be tacklers with him reveals the real trick. So we have two clues: a combination of a father-induced social conscience and a focused determination to charge ahead and carry tacklers with him. I must add these days that the sport is not football, but a gentler sport, softball, but not run-of-the-mill softball, rather focused, determined, and hard play, fast pitch softball. He is a fan, however, of hardball, as we've known earlier tonight, and I'm sure he wants to get back to the hustings and watch what happened to that hockey or football game or whatever it was. I have one other footprint from the past. As a young man, after finishing work under a fellowship at Union Theological Seminary, and before going to law school, he worked in East Harlem among poor blacks and Puerto Ricans on housing projects, youth sports, and gang intervention initiatives. He said at this time, "It was the defining year of my life." So much for the clues of the past. And what was the result? You are now aware of the extraordinary range of his efforts, from youthful counsel to an ethics commission, to leading the nation's watchdog of common cause. I add only a footnote on the nature of his tenure as Attorney General. Things that go beyond routine accomplishment and honors. He brought to law enforcement not only a persistent focus on effective punishment, but an emphasis on prevention of crime. The first is illustrated by his 83% conviction rate and 180 prosecutions of public corruption. His prevention record is one of innovation. Notably, his remarkable Safe Neighborhood initiative involving both social workers and law enforcement personnel, and Operation Clean Sweep aimed at clearing neighborhoods of drug dealers. Now, putting on his hat as a private lawyer, he's urging corporations to look upon the current unrest about corporate conduct as a window of opportunity to clean house, set standards for executive compensation, audits, and independent directors, and adopt formal ethic codes. This has been and still is a uniquely valuable career. It is the career of a congenital gadfly, in the dictionary sense of a constructively provocative stimulus. To some, this translates into confounded nuisance. But so often today's nuisance is tomorrow's profit. Former Attorney General Francis Bellotti paid him the highest compliment, calling him my social conscience. His own close associate during his service as Attorney General of Massachusetts, the Deputy Chief of the Government Bureau, Peter Sachs, who is here tonight, mentions this by saying that time after time, when difficult decisions with political consequences had to be made, Harshbarger's instruction was, do the right thing based on the law and the facts. When I called Peter, who clerked for me and also for Judge to do, and said, did you really mean that? And he says, oh, we did that thousands of times. I am deeply honored to welcome the 12th Coffin lecturer, one who has proven that one can have a social conscience impelling public service and survive in many roles. The Honorable Scott Harshbarger.
With that introduction, I should probably have meditated here. And I don't quite know how you top that, so if it were not being the son of a minister, I don't think I could rise up there. I would probably, the better course of battle would have been simply take questions now. But since I have some of you confined for a bit of time, and we have no idea what the Red Sox are doing, and if they're ahead, you don't want to jinx them by leaving. If they're losing, it's once again 67, 75, 86. Stars are open, and off we go. I am deeply grateful for these wonderful words of introduction. And unfortunately, many of you in this room know me. And therefore, I simply hope you will pretend that this were absolutely on track. And this is a great honor, and I am to some extent humbled. But on the other hand, see this as one of those rare opportunities to have so many members of the judiciary track. That many of you who are not JD disabled be in a position of having to listen to what a lawyer might sound like if you stopped practicing law for a long period of time and just been a humble public lawyer. And to the rest of you, it is my opportunity to both thank so many of you for your incredible, dedicated public service, for all that you have done, but to also challenge you as the leaders of this generation to meet the challenges we all face, and to the next generation of leaders in the profession in our society to urge you to think about what it is this career you're about to embark on. The words of Dean Corey are particularly gratifying to me because I know not only do I have come to talk to her, but so many members of this faculty that I greatly respect. And I've never seen Alzheimer's on fire. And therefore, it's particularly rewarding to be here and to see a young student of mine, David Clucci, and some others here. So it's a wonderful faculty, Jenny Reagan's and others. Secondly, to be introduced by Judge Coffin is, of course, a singular honor. I simply can only say thank you for that introduction. It is wonderful. It is a great honor. And for somebody who I have respected, and so many people in this room I work for and respect greatly, it is truly a great honor, because in many respects he exemplifies the combination of dedication, compassion, skill, combining your personal skills with your profession, with your professional skills with your personal values, that has offered me and so many like me the opportunity to serve in these vocations in a way that you never want to do anything else, but more importantly, you are enhanced and ennobled as a human being by having had these opportunities. And we simply wish that more people had it. Judge Coffin also represents my view of the holistic public servant, of somebody who has demonstrated simply every day that we are deeply grateful to the people who serve in public life, but we also challenge them and expect so much of them. And very few people meet that goal or can. But he certainly has and continues. With that, I would like tonight, to speak to you about a few thoughts that I've had based on things that I've done since 1999. And I look back at 1999 for those of you that have had to grieve at various times. When you lose an election, albeit hubris, self-interest, ego, you also face the fact you lost. And the votes aren't going to change. There's still 2.5% sitting somewhere in some box in Boston that I'm sure represent my margin of victory. And every time you said in California that we're just going to miss 3% of the votes, it doesn't really matter. I said to myself, that's a problem. But that happened. And in one sense, one phase of my life at that point ended. I'm sure all of you have had some experiences like this. And you're faced with the challenge of what you do now. Because something, a life that you love, that you had the opportunity to work with exceptional professionals who came together, whether it was in a public defender's office, a law reform community, an attorney general's office, an ethics commission, a district attorney's office, an attorney general's office, who came together as professionals to try to do the right thing, to make a difference in the quality of people's lives, to represent people without who had no one, and who helped make me a far better leader, and also gave me a great deal of credit and honored me by their presence. That is my vision of what a public servant is. A public servant who happens to be a lawyer. And that was the vision that I had. And I still do. But in this time, I've had a chance to think as many of you have. What difference is it today between 1999 and today? What has occurred that makes me feel that this has been, in the words of Judge Coffin's favorite phrase, I gather, a sea change in our culture, in our society? It's not that we have today tensions between civil rights and security. We've had those at various times in our life, in my life. It's not that we're concerned about why people don't participate in our democracy, why the office of citizen is not seen as one of the still great obligations we all have in today's democracy and the history of civilization, and why people don't participate. Well, it's not greed and financial incentives and corruption hasn't influenced the private sector in business or the public sector, and that's not necessarily new. But the change feels quite different to me, and it's not just because I'm now a grandfather with 4 granddaughters. It's not that I had the joy of moving from life of partisan politics to the world of common cause in Washington, D.C., where Shelley Pingree, very pleased, succeeded me there, but go way beyond all this in achieving that leadership. But other things have happened, and some are very tangible. But one of the things I think we want to think about, and I'd like you to think about, is where did the passion go in the public interest law community? Where did our passion go as citizens who believed that we truly could make a difference in our democracy? Now, maybe you still feel that, and this is just an academic discussion. But I'd like to challenge you tonight to be sure that you still feel that with good cause, rather than have a memory of what was. Because so many of us had the luxury, and it was a tragedy that gave us that luxury, of growing up in the 60s. Yes, that was a long time ago. Yes, there were rotary phones. No, we didn't have computers. All those things. But we could walk and talk. But that period for me was defining. From the death of a president, assassination of a president, assassination of my heroes, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, a Vietnam War that in many respects challenged us to see whether our government was truthful or not, a civil rights movement that while achieving wonderful ends, also exposed a deep, dark strain of racism that we have not yet even begun to fathom or remedy in this country. But out of it came a movement that people here have continued in every sector. The public interest law movement. Remember back in 1970, Common Cause was founded. John Gardner, who I got to know in the last 2 years of Common Cause. John Gardner came, was in Washington, and said that the only group in Washington that wasn't organized was the people. And it was time for the people's voice, the public interest to be heard. It wasn't to eliminate money or special interest. It was simply to say that in public policy and democracy, the people's voice ought also to be heard. And hundreds of thousands of people sent $100 for Common Cause to be founded. They happened to take on the Vietnam War, happened to take on public corruption and ethics and financial disclosure. It could have been, as he said, tax reform. It could have been Bob Monks's corporate reform at that time. It could have been any number of things, but that's what it was. Ralph Nader and the consumer movement, the environmental movement, and Earth, the civil rights movement is just common, and many of you in addition have pointed out, in your lifetimes on the bench, the world changed in the area not just of administrative law, but of civil rights law into a whole other set of generation. And I happened to be lucky enough to become a lawyer in that time frame. And I was probably lucky enough because my father, a minister, as was pointed out, tried to convince me that coming out of Harvard College and having spent a year at Union Theological Seminary, that while the ministry had been for him as a child of oppression, the first in his family to go to college along with my mother who was a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. And by the way, as a footnote, believes that no reform in education ever topped the one-room schoolhouse for any of you concerned about education. But he believed that in the next 25 years of my life, the law was going to become the defining vehicle. And in a way, he was absolutely right. It had come to define us. Every social, moral, and economic issue, the law was involved. If we didn't like a problem, as legislators or citizens, we passed a law. We made it a crime. And we handed it over to the prosecutors in the court system. And then when it failed to solve the problem, we looked at society and said, what's wrong with our society? What has happened to our young people? Where has our sense of community gone? But our whole life turned into a focus on litigation and the law. And to some extent, that is a failure. Because the law, and litigation, and the law most important was never meant to be the defining ethic of our time. It was to set the minimum ethic, to put the framework. We were then supposed to infuse in that civic virtues, religious virtues, educational virtues, parental virtues, the positive norms of our society. But sadly, for whatever reason, many abdicated, and many of those institutions abdicated their responsibility. And so it wasn't a partnership anymore. It was one or the other. And many of you have written more about this, thought more about this than I have, and could speak to more of this. All of you could add your own thoughts about that, whether you agree fully or not. But I raise it here because I think today, we will look back on similar kinds of circumstances, and the question will be, was this the end of the era of the public interest being a defining value of our community and society, or is it the renewal, in the words of John Gardner, the renewal of our values and our commitment to what public service and public interest means, not as a separate segmented part of our society, but as an integral part of what it means to be a democracy. And that's what the title of my theme tonight is. Strengthening Democracy. In a time when we're thinking about security, and civil rights, and we're thinking about what it means to be a democracy, when you are at some great external pressure, great threats, what does it mean to have a strong democracy? And I'd like to think with you just for a few minutes about that. And allow me, if you will, to do it in this context. I want you to think about, if I can, the view that John Gardner had, that he was not alone, what it means to be a citizen of democracy. Now, I recognize that for many, many people, the concept of citizenship has failed, does not exist. Civic education in many schools is not mandatory. Many of us simply have failed to understand this, whether we're right or not. You speak to young people, it's not that you disagree, it's that there has been no defining models or heroes talking about this. The Harvard Vanishing Voter Project has demonstrated that less than 50% of young people have grown up in families where their parents even voted. So something that seemed routine, fundamental, is not fundamental. Any more than it was for those of us, Peter Sachs and others, in dealing with safe neighborhood issues and finding young people, young urban young people who were rebelling, or we thought were rebelling. But the problem was nobody ever told them there's another way to resolve the problem other than run or fight. Learning that lost art of mediation, conflict resolution, was to them a safety mechanism. Learning that there was another way, because the community they saw, in their family, in their streets, on television, was a community where violence was the way that problems were resolved, including their own nation, as opposed to peace or other kinds of resolution. Now, that deviates a bit from simply the theme that we're talking here about the fundamental value of being a citizen. Jimmy Carter is purported to have said in his biography that he left the office of presidency, albeit involuntarily, to assume the most important office in a democracy, the office of citizen. William Jefferson Clinton said the same thing when he left his last term, and John Gardner has spoken to this eloquently to remind all of us that, above all, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy assumes a certain mutuality. You can't expect your leaders to be honest and accountable if you're not going to be honest and accountable. If you're not going to vote, if you're not going to participate, if you're not going to assume the office of citizen, then where are the checks and balances? This is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That is democracy. And this is a democracy that in the year 2000, at the closest election of our lifetime, two candidates for president. And we don't even know if the one who was elected won. We know they won by one vote, 5-4, the Supreme Court of the United States. The closest election of our lifetime. And certain things are interesting about that election. One, it was so close it took 36 days or more, with lawyers not playing the role of articulating their values, but arguing about checks, legal strategies, which counties to count, which not to count. Also, pictured many state secretaries of state sitting over there saying, never, for the grace of God, will lie. Because in the high-tech capital world, we don't even know how to count the votes of the people who even come to vote and guarantee that they can be there. So all of those issues are there. We also saw the highest turnout we've seen in recent times of young urban black Americans, many of whom couldn't even vote because they weren't on the registration sheets in many states, in spite of the efforts of the NAACP and many of the efforts to get that turnout. That was all there. And the second piece we saw, of course, was an election that was close, but where both parties and both candidates raced to the middle as fast as they could, dealing with issues that focus groups had proved and consultants felt were not harm or offend anybody. And therefore, we didn't debate issues that every American cared deeply about. They didn't agree about it, but they cared about it. The failed drug law, racism in the justice system, the death penalty, universal health care, a variety of other kinds of concerns were never debated in that final election. And in addition, we spent more money, hard and soft, than any election of our lifetime. On television, on negative advertising, and the result of that was, in the greatest democracy in the world, the year 2000, less than 50% of the people who were registered to vote even took the time to vote. Even took the time to vote. 100 million people in this country sat on the sidelines while we elected our president. Now, you've all heard that story. The point of it to me was this. We had a constitutional crisis. That close, the Supreme Court decided when the president's brother was in the state, governor of the state, questions about the ballot, and yet this democracy stood firm in a way most other democracies might have failed. And we accepted the word of the Supreme Court even if we didn't agree with it, because it's the essence of democracy to do that. That is a strong thing. The weakness was, where have all the people gone? Why didn't they feel that they could participate on their vote counted? The issues that you alone can say were important, not even the ones that were on the table. Would choice remain a viable option for women? That's a Supreme Court of the United States issue. But what did we talk about? Corporate integrity. Didn't talk about what we do with Afghanistan, Iraq. We didn't talk about any of the issues that today affect us. We didn't discuss the Patriot Act. We didn't discuss security and civil rights. We didn't discuss really affirmative action. We didn't talk about any of those issues. The second piece of that, and that's our citizen piece, the second piece of that comes with it, follows with it. What does it mean in a democracy threatened from outside? What does civil rights and civil liberties mean in that kind of democracy? Here's where the lawyers, you would think, come into play to try to figure out this balance. It's our Constitution we're interpreting. Now, Bill Moyers has said that he never feared for a minute that we would not, as a country, as a nation, withstand external threats. He always thought we'd rally, if only going back to the memory of the greatest generation, if only to remember that external threat would pull us together. What he feared, however, was what we talked about in the first example. He feared erosion from within. That we would, by apathy and cynicism, erode the strength of our democracy. That we would not rally from within to have strength to figure out how to cope with these kinds of challenges. Maybe it's money in politics that drove us out. Maybe it's simply candidates were not candidates who articulated visions. Maybe people are tired of partisan politics. Maybe it's because both parties are addicted to money. Maybe it's because my party, the Democratic Party, is on fumes. It doesn't know what it stands for anymore. Maybe it's because the Republican Party is not the party of Lincoln and John McCain. Whatever reason it is, we didn't energize the United Leaders of Tomorrow to participate. But more importantly, when it came time to have a balance right up front between what are our concerns about our security and how we balance that with civil rights, we as a nation had forgotten how to debate. We had forgotten how to dissent does not mean disloyalty. We had forgotten the habits of citizenship. We had forgotten that a democracy, I don't have the right to have my way, but I have the right and the responsibility to be heard. I have the obligation to express my views. And yet, we as a nation really didn't know then, after 9/11, and still don't know today, really how to discuss one of the most important things that is occurring in our democracy, which is we are testing up front in the paper every day, the balance between security and public protection and civil rights and civil liberties. It's a tension. I think Judge Coffin has written about it, most of you have written about it. It's always a tension. We ask our police officers in this country to do something, we ask no the police officers in the world are asked to do, which is protect us, make our homes, our neighborhoods, our streets safe, but preserve our civil rights and civil liberties at the same time. It doesn't always work well, it's not always in balance, but we always seem to have a set of checks and balances dealing with that. We also know, and I yield to no one in this respect in being tough on crime, if you will. We know that one of the great civil rights issues of our time is whether you're entitled to the same level of safety and security if you live in urban America as you live in suburban America. Do you have lesser rights to be safe or walk home because you're black, because you're Hispanic, because you're poor? Surely you're entitled to the same level of input and control without becoming the subject of martial law. We saw we can do that, but we did it the old-fashioned way. The best achieved form of public protection is prevention, trust, partnerships for progress. They were done, they were achieved. Now we come to this great threat we face today. We're about to have a presidential election in which people simply do not know how to discuss and disagree without being disagreeable. We don't know how to do what Bob Dole even asked us on his 80th birthday when they dedicated his library in Kansas. He said, I hope, above all, we somehow figure out how to have disagreements in this country without turning it into holy war. This is Bob Dole. He said, I want to have a show as legislators we know how to get things done and achieve things. Now that is a challenge to us as lawyers, because this is a class. Lawyers are defining the ball game here. The Attorney General of the United States is a lawyer. The leaders of the Civil Liberties Union are lawyers. The challenge is, who's talking in the middle here? Where are the rest of us? Where is the organized bar? Where are citizens? Why don't people understand that this is very important to make discussion? Again, you don't have the right to win, but I want to rally behind my president. I want to make sure that he or she is having a debating discussion. We've lost that habit. It's a habit of citizenship, but it's also one of the things that every lawyer in this room was trained to deal with from the day we walked into law school. It was how to balance in competing times. Not what it was in 1968 when we went to law school, but the principles that apply today as the law evolves. Do we really want to have a Guantanamo Bay in the United States of America? Do we really believe that that's making us safer? Do we really believe that a dramatically expanding the Patriot Act is what will make us as a nation free of terrorism? You may. I don't. I think what will make us free is people believing firmly that the law will be applied equally, that it will be fair, that whether you are black, Arab American, white, you'll be treated fairly. And you won't kid yourself, or we can't kid ourselves, that if you're sitting in this country and you hear us talk about this will just apply, and I say this very carefully, to Arab Americans, and not to you African Americans, we're kidding ourselves. Every minority group person in this country understands what it means when we talk about cracking down on people's civil rights. And the rest of us need to understand it and defend it as we did and had before. That's a challenge, because we've lost the habit. We send our checks to Civil Liberties Union, some of us don't, some of us do. And we tell them, go get it. But we often sit back and we don't participate. How many of us are supporting or opposing a candidate for president because of our beliefs or feeling about security and civil rights in this day and age? You may or may not. But how many of us are asking those questions of every candidate, including the President of the United States, the party of Abraham Lincoln and John McCain at the same time? The third piece that I just like to touch upon, which is often a longer part of my remarks, but I will not belabor your tolerate or test your patience much longer. But I do want to talk about the third piece, because I think this is where the rubber meets the road in these intersections. First, election democracy is all about us as citizens. All of us are citizens. Some of us are lawyers. And that's the second part. Lawyers have a special status in democracy. Lawyers have a special status because we act for it and claim it as the interpreters of the Constitution. It is a constitutional democracy we are expounding here. And lawyers have a special status and role in doing that and helping people understand that. And we ask for special privileges because of it. We therefore have a very special obligation to interpret it. And it comes to play in something pretty mundane. You can just chalk off as good old greed and scandal in corporate America. We've been through our 25 years ago in public life with ethics and financial disclosure laws. We went through it, we keep going through our nonprofit communities from time to time with high salaries and people diverting money for charitable purposes. And that's not good. It's not to be applauded. We've gone through some of that. Today we face what I think is a very serious problem in corporate America. And I say this to somebody who believes that the economic markets Our economic system is the key to the quality of life for everyone in this nation. Is the only way we are able to say with any degree of dignity that every person in this country can make it, can have access. It's our economic system that does that. But when you can't trust the numbers, when there's not one independent director in America, as my friend, a vice president, at one of the major financial institutions said to me, was there not one independent director anywhere in America over the last 2 years who would stand up and say, this is wrong? This is just because it's illegal doesn't make it right. And more importantly, where else have we lost $7.5 trillion in the space of a 2 to 3 year period and seen no political reaction whatsoever? No riots in the streets, no demand for change of any major kind mobilized here. And why is that? Some of it's because we don't understand the markets. Some of it's too complicated. We didn't go to business school. We're not accountants, we're not auditors. But some of it's also pretty basic. We have a massive breakdown, a massive ethical breakdown in this country. The SROs, whatever you want to talk about it, money reached the independence of lawyers, accountants, auditors, CFOs, CEOs, boards of directors. And the people that paid the price was the average American. Main Street paid the price hugely in 401ks gone, retirements, pensions, jobs lost, companies moved. This is a massive political problem. It is not a partisan problem. It's not a Republican or Democratic problem. It's a massive social problem. We're seeing radical changes, but it's not occurring because the legal profession has identified it as a major public interest area of importance to deal with. And it's not happening because the average citizen is identified it yet. And I believe, and close with this, that the average citizen does not understand what they could possibly do. Ben Barber wrote an interesting op-ed in the New York Times about 1.5 years ago, where he said this is not a failure of capitalism. Because capitalism, Richard Breeden has said, it's the problem of a few capitalists, not capitalism. And it's a market that needs adult supervision. And there was no adult supervision. And when we had no adult supervision in the 80s with urban America, we passed mandatory sentences, we sent them to jail, we did all kinds of things. Well, we were just beginning maybe with white-collar America to apply that law. But the reality was, in this area, people simply have not figured out what to do. We are making changes, and they're important changes, and changes can be made. But what occurs to me in this is the following. This is an area where every single transaction at WorldCom, Enron, Global Crossing, Adelphia, Tyco, Q-West, any of another dozen to 25 of the leading industries in America were serious problems, restatement and fraud and crime. In all those cases, there was a lawyer who saw and reviewed and participated at some level in all of that. The challenge then is, was it truly our responsibility to preserve confidentiality and secrets, to be sure that our clients could get zealous advocacy within the law that allowed us to participate or advise and counsel our clients in that enterprise? Was it that we simply didn't know what our clients were doing? Were we, like the New York Stock Exchange Board, either we knew it and felt that it was perfectly okay, or at least didn't cross any boundary line, or on the other side, which is probably worse, we didn't know what was occurring, and yet we took our fees, we took the benefits of that, and the result was that the public lost hugely. So we come to this point. For me, these three examples demonstrate two things. One is we've lost the ability as a citizenry figure out how to express our views and be heard in key corridors of power. We may test it with shareholder democracy in corporate America. We may figure how to do it in other ways. But it's going to be a new day and a new beginning. The second is, as lawyers, there is lots of work to go around in terms of defining what it means to be a lawyer. To be a lawyer in the best sense. Not whether you have the good fortune to be in a public interest role. It's easy to be a dedicated public lawyer if you're a DA, or a public defender, or a legal aid attorney. That's the role. The challenge comes when you are in the middle of dealing with conflicting obligations. When you are representing your client, but you also somehow have to figure out what the broader obligation is. And if you don't do it, your profession needs to do it. And that's our challenge. They're tied this way. In a constitutional democracy, we need to have an active, aggressive, professional bar and lawyers interpreting our obligations so that the citizens can actively and positively fulfill their role as the office of citizens. They're not separate. They're all part of the community. It's the interstices that we deal with, the public and private sector, and those conflicting obligations. Fraud is not risk. It is not an ethical dilemma if your clients are committing a crime or you're committing a crime. That's not an ethical dilemma. That's just illegal. The dilemma is when the principles conflict. And each of you has spent your careers trying to find that balance. And probably done it very well. What I fear is we as a society have forgotten how to strike those balances. And in a democracy, in an era where the law should speak to the values of a democracy, inclusion, fairness, integrity, honesty, accountability, the law has got to respond in the way it's possible. It's a great challenge. We can't succeed. John Gardner once said that the greatest opportunity lies, frankly, golden opportunities exist when you face insurmountable obstacles. And the only challenge is to convince the people that they have a role to play. People trump money. People in democracy win. We've seen examples of doing it. But we never do it by being passive. We never do it by complaining. We don't do it by whining. We don't get to do it simply standing on the sidelines and being pure and virtuous, but not being in the fray. The challenge to each of us, to me, to you, is not to look at what our legacy was, but to do as Judge Coffin has challenged. With the legacy you have, what will you do with it now? How do you stand on the shoulders and create for the next generation of leaders and activists, role models and mentors, and prepare them to reclaim our democracy and the pride and value of being a lawyer in the public interest, in public service, whatever your vocation may be. Thank you very much.
Harshbarger, Scott, if I may, has agreed to answer questions from the group for 5 or 10 minutes. So if there are people who would like to ask a question, we can point.
Yes.
How do you define
Oh, that's what I used to ask Judge Coffin. How do you define that thing that I want to get to win? Public interest. I don't think it has in itself an inherent definition at all. Your public interest may not be my public interest, but I suppose I prefer to hear more broadly. As in my study, I'm going to be very specific. It is a hard question. I think I can answer it to my mind. I have always seen the public interest as a lawyer as being the set of interests and values that exist collectively. That is, and I believe I've been very lucky to be in positions where my job was to define it broadly. And I think that role definition is actually very important because it helps you. And I think in the early part of my life, and maybe this is a function of aging, and I don't admit that I'm aging, but in case I was aging, life gets a little more gray. The black and white doesn't apply. The things you say you never tolerate, guess what? Your kids do. I'm a recovering parent. So you learn what you never say never about anything. But I think that the role helps me define that. I think one of the challenges is, the first is, I think the public interest law movement is no longer a movement. I think it is a cease to articulate a broad-based set of standards. I think we have divided into some factions. Some of it's a function of sophistication. But it's actually why I think the corporate governance piece offers a real opportunity. Because I think we have not yet defined what the public interest is there. Bob Monks may know, Rick may know, people may have some idea, but I don't think publicly we have yet really articulated what we expect the obligations to be of boards of directors, what we expect of shareholders, what we expect of government in relation to them. So this is an opportunity in a way that I think 30 years ago was the way we're thinking about the environmental or consumer law movement. There's an opportunity here to articulate what's the broader public good that you are trying to achieve. And that doesn't have to be litigation. That can be legislation, counseling, advice, advocacy. The group is missing here, I think, in the other ones. In each of the other ones, too, I would argue. This is why I felt so good about the tobacco litigation as Attorney General. Not really out, I'm not happy with the outcome. I mean, the end result was not everything I wished at this point. But I was happy because it was fun, once again in my lifetime, a chance for the law to support a public policy already being established. The early civil rights litigation and the environmental litigation was in support of a popular public movement. The people were moving. They were trying to articulate what it meant to care about the environment, and the law was used as a supplement to help define it. Sadly, with any movement, the danger of litigation in the courts it drains the energy. What do you do in a court case? You can't pick at the court. You really can't, except in the worst cases of Jim Crow. You can't pick a court. So, in some respects, my definition is a public interest in the law is helping move forward a public policy that also has as yet no defined special interest or people who really don't yet have a voice. Now, that doesn't always mean you're right at the end of the day. But I think that's one way to do it. The second is the challenge of the public interest side, I think, is, and we can talk about, they talk about this more, I think it's very tricky for a lawyer who has private clients to play. You can't even play out each case, but the profession could. I mean, the profession can't be saying we support equal protection, equal access, legal services, and everything else, and then let them die. Just because we can't provide it. I mean, so just take that piece. You can't now get a job with public interest. We haven't provided opportunity for every person who wants to be a public interest lawyer. You can't go get a job right now if you want to do that instead of going to a law firm. So the profession has things to do in that regard, I think, that are important. So I don't know if it's an answer, but at least I'll stop. Yes. I can be actually possibly a little bit more brief if you'd like that. To make a comment here. Yes.
If the Supreme Court were writing its first political campaign funding decision today instead of in the 1970s, do you think they'd come out differently?
Boy, I hope so, but I think this is one of the games. There are lots of you sitting here as judges in this room who know how this thing sort of, unintended consequences are real problem. If I were doing it, well, my answer to the Supreme Court in funding is, I think this massive loophole in soft money is in my view, and it's in my view, the judge was changing his mind on this, it's a no-brainer. I mean, you had a set of laws that people found a scheme to get around so they can pump huge amounts of money into individual campaigns and committees. That has been illegal. It should have been declared illegal. If we had any kind of enforcement in the Federal Election Commission, it would have been illegal a long time ago. But that didn't happen. So now the Supreme Court said that. The second issue is, what's the First Amendment mean here? And I think it's got, I don't think the First Amendment necessarily, it deals with disclosure of money, but the trouble is we have so many interpretations of it. So my answer to this is, let the Supreme Court decide what it wants to decide. Hopefully it will, sort of be very, very artful here and try to find the narrowest possible interpretation, whatever it does, and send it with it. I'd like to see it go back to Congress. But second is, I think this is why the alternative theory to the public interest is public funding. I truly believe that the main solution is the answer in this area of campaign finance in my lifetime, because there's so many unintended consequences occurred here in terms of how this all played out. But one thing that's crystal clear today is, it seems to me, is if you want to spend money and you want to spend your time raising money, you should be able to. But if you don't, and you're willing to go under restrictions that are appropriate under public funding laws, then that makes sure that you'll have contested elections and let people run for office on their merits. They're not going to always win, and probably won't win all the time. But at least it offers that alternative. Because the thing they're trying to change the campaign finance laws, in my view, is that you've given up on bribery and corruption at one level. I mean, it's legal now to give tons of money to somebody totally in their self-interest. And there's no shame, there's no outrage, for lots of reasons. But the other side of it is, it is not in a democracy tolerable for, in my state, 80% of Democrats or incumbents to run uncontested every year, year in and year out. In a democracy, you're supposed to have elections. You're supposed to have contests. And when money is the barrier to contest, then we have to find a way around that. You can't do it through the law. And maybe this goes also to your question. Our problems has become, we're always trying to find a legal solution to something, when one of the answers to this is, and I say this carefully, the way Howard Dean is doing it today, and as the way the elected, like Arnold Schwarzenegger did it in California. You mobilize the people. The people were angry as hell in California, and they're not going to take it anymore, and he was the leader. And we may not agree with it, some people do. But 75% of people in California voted. We haven't had turnouts like that in elections anywhere. And those of us who claim more participate cannot complain that the people took the time to go and vote. We got to now do a better job than Bill Warrior's term. We got to start saying to people, in the words of Bill Warrior's cab driver, he always uses, he says, Mr. Warriors, people think that we're stupid. It's not, we're not stupid, we're just uninformed. And so part of the job is to do the education piece. Howard Dean has demonstrated, whether you agree with that, that if you have a message, you mobilize people, people will mobilize and they'll give money. That may be the most important thing that's going on the Democratic side right now. So I'm seeking a solution outside of the law. I want citizenship, democracy, to answer some of these questions, not the Supreme Court of the United States. Yes, sir.
This is much of what you talked about, sort of two theories that are working at cross purposes, which are compromise and leadership in government versus an obsession with absolute victory. Because it seems to me your comments with Senator Dole about disagreeing while being disagreeable, it seems to me that at least in recent history, those voters who do participate aren't really interested in rewarding that type of approach. And we have a tendency to reward those candidates, those public servants who tend to be stick their heels in and demand only their way. And they get less credit for saying, well, my side can get a little, your side can get a little, let's do it for the good of whatever. And that's cited as sort of recent history. Both the first President Bush in saying, well, I said I wasn't going to raise taxes, but now I will, because we need to. And a recent presidential candidate who may have run to the middle, but figured that maybe he might be rewarded in that area. I wonder about your comments.
Well, I mean, first of all, you probably should write a new speak to address that point, because a lot of that's a great example of what I think the issue is. I believe that in a democracy, you're going to have polarized views. I mean, you're going to have ideological Republicans, ideological Democrats, ideological Libertarians. You're going to have people who care passionately for ideological reasons. That's perfectly tolerable. And you're going to have people who get formed that way because their special interest is important to them. And, you know, whether it's the pharmaceutical, the tobacco company, whether it's the labor unions, they're going to have their interests. They're going to drive it. The way we conduct our politics today does, in fact, advantage people who are, in that sense, polarized. Because the rest of us stay on the sidelines. We don't like it. We don't like conflict. We don't think it matters. My own view is that one of the things that's going on in our election cycle right now is that both parties have found it's better to have lower turnouts than higher turnouts. It's one of the reasons for the opposition to same-day registration, to easier ways to do it, because you can poll it, focus group it, know who's coming out, and target it. And a lot of the Credit Center established that 98% of the money raised in most campaigns goes to negative advertising. So it's meant to drive down turnout. It's meant to convince you that you're right. Your basic instinct is right. It doesn't matter if I vote. Apathy, cynicism is right. It's not insane, because it's fair to say, as Russ Feingold was saying, any group here, when he was running for U.S. Senator, he truly believed that for state senator, he truly believed anybody could grow up and run for president of the United States. He said, today, when we did the Americans for Freedom Reform Movement tour of the country, he would say, today I do not believe that. Unless you're wealthy, unless you're very ideological, or unless you want to spend all your time raising money, you cannot be elected to any federal office. Now, my answer to that, in part, is that that's why we have got to find out how we get people more involved. I tend to think it's going to happen in two ways. One is grassroots level. I challenge anybody in this room who wants to run for city council, selectmen, school board education. You could do it as long as you get 20 people in this room who will hold signs for you, go vote for you. You'll win. You can win at the local level. And that may be one of the ways to start. Secondly, I would like, I don't want to have to take the time here, I don't know how many people in this room have run for office themselves, supported candidates at all levels to run for office, given money to a candidate, or even, I hate to ask it, how many people even voted on the last election? So that we sit here with not even doing the standard things in terms of participation, and it's not an accident, therefore, that those people who care, those that have special interests, those that have ideological interests, win these elections. The vast middle of America, the trouble with the vast middle, this sounds a little bit paternalistic, but I think it's true. When you can get more people voting for American Idol in 24 hours than you can get to care about who's your president, who's your senator, you know, it's not the consumer. The problem is certainly you can't blame the consumers. I mean, there's something going on here that has to do with the lack of relevance that the political process has come to represent for most people. It's why my hope in large measure is actually the corporate governance movement. Because I think that the opportunity here is to mobilize a broad coalition of business people, Republicans and Democrats, and 90% of CEOs who want to play by the rules, who are fully prepared to compete fairly, who actually really got nailed because WorldCom and Tyco were playing off the books. The vast majority of people and economic interests at stake. Every single citizen in this country has a stake in having good economic recovery and businesses that do well by doing good. And I think the challenge is how you talk about it, the challenge is how to make it relevant to them. But that's the opportunity. It's not partisan, it's not ideological. It is, though, affects somebody very basically. And this is, I think, figuring out how you get people to care and get committed is the first step in democracy. And I believe that we're back to that. I think we have lost the habit. Not just a habit, we've lost reason for why we should care about who gets elected. And when that happens, we erode the very core substance of a democracy. And that's our greatest weakness. And for that, I thank you and I apologize.
I just wanted to thank Scott Harshbarger, Judge Coffin, and all of you for coming. coming tonight, but I want to say a special word about the person who makes all of this happen, my wonderful assistant, Beth Wilkins. She just does a great job, and many of you have dealt with her and know how great she is. Next year, I always like to use this opportunity to tell you who our Coffin lecturer is next year. Next year, our 13th Coffin lecturer will be here on Thursday, October 14th. I'm sure you're all opening up your calendars and writing that down. Is Justice Richard Goldstone, who is Justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. Justice Goldstone served as chair of South Africa's Commission on Inquiry regarding Public Violence and Intimidation from 1991 to 1994. Many of us know the work of that commission. More recently, he served as chair of the International Independent Inquiry into Kosovo, and he's been involved in many other important human rights activities around the world. So it would be a wonderful opportunity for all of us, and I hope if you have your 2004 calendars, you'll mark down October 14th. Again, thanks for coming, and let's hope that while we were doing this, the Red Sox won. I did ask him, he said in his speech last night, I graduated from college the same year that he did, that, one of the great things for our generation was we were optimistic, we believed we could make change happen, that things were susceptible to change and law could make a difference, and we all have a feeling, or we have a feeling, that maybe that's changed a little for you, so I wanted him to inspire you to those values which are so important, I think, to all of us in our generation. So, Scott.
Well, let me first allow people to get your pizza, but I'm honored to be here with Judge Coffin because I do think that if you look at a full career full, somebody who's been in all branches of government, he sort of exemplifies not only the experience range, but also that you can, what I think of, absolutely match your professional skills with your personal values and have an impact. And the segue for me on that is that throughout this career, whatever I have sacrificed financially, which my wife and my adult children who are not going to have a major inheritance and all that may regret, in return, it's been the kind of career. And the challenge for me now is to continue that, in which I've had opportunities to do what very few people get to do. One is to go to work every day and feel you can make a difference in people's lives, whether you do it or not. Secondly, to be in situations where you're using the law as a major tool of social, economic, moral justice, reform, or change, by using the rules of the profession, by using the standards of the profession to do that, and affect change and reform. And thirdly, you also get to attract people who share those sets of values, who want for some period in their career to, in the public sector, make that kind of a difference. Now, the footnote to that is, and I have to give this quote to Jim Tierney, former AG of Maine. You have to understand my bias about this. The bias is this, as Jim says, the least interesting thing a public lawyer does every day is more interesting than the most interesting thing that an associate in a private firm does any day. Now, that doesn't put food on the table, that doesn't do a lot of other things, but what it does do is demonstrate that if you do this well, and I've had the fortune of being with people who've done it well, you can attract incredibly good people because you can challenge them not only in terms of mission and vision, but in terms of professional experience. Because the great benefit of the public sector is that you tend to get, sometimes inappropriately, more experience faster, more responsibility, opportunities to make mistakes, learn, grow, ideally in circumstances where you're well supervised and evaluated, so you get that trade-off. But my recruiting tool was always that if you can handle it financially, I will promise in return that you will get the best professional experience practicing with us in the public interest that you would get anywhere. And that's the balance. Now, the balance works best when your spouse or significant other is employed in the private sector. And it works best if you keep talking to all your friends who are in law firms. Because every story you tell will be far more interesting than any story they can tell. And so you'll get some sort of reward from that. The two other pieces I want to say just about this, and not to be facetious, are that whatever you do in your career, my advice is that every 2 years, you look at what you're doing, wherever you are, and decide if that is professionally and personally what you want to be doing. Now, you can step back from that this way. The next 5 years of your career you ought to see as a postgraduate period. Unless you know exactly what you want to do, and many of you may, I think you've got to look at the next period as being your PG years. You're trying to figure out not what you want to do, but what you don't want to do. You want to eliminate options. Now, this is the great advantage of co-op programs. It's a great advantage of clinical programs. It's a great advantage of using your summers. But you can also do it during, you're trying to figure out what it is you don't want to do. And you have time. The other flip of that is, if you do want to go to a private firm, and I did, a much different time, much different circumstances, didn't face the golden handcuffs that many people face now. But it's particularly important if you go in either the private firm or public, every 2 years. In the public sector, you need to do it because you're going to start to feel that either you're a second-class citizen, you ought to be doing something else. So you want to know why you're doing it. So for the next, you don't commit yourself for life. Just say, for the next 2 years. And my theory was, if I can get you for 2 years, I'll get you for 8. If I can't convince you after 2 years that this is more valuable for you to do than something else, then until the finances overwhelm you somehow, that will be the thing. And that was my biggest benefit, was having people stay over long periods of time with me. Some cases, particularly I benefited from the period in the 1970s where women were simply not able to get into major Boston law firms. And I just was blessed to get just outstanding people who ended up, by the time I finished as district attorney, 65% of my supervisors and chiefs were women, and more than half of my prosecutorial staff were women. And I only stress that because they were also incredibly qualified attorneys. But it also helped me deal with my first experience with why it matters to have a diversified workforce. Because it meant that I didn't have to worry about whether we were concerned about children, victims, domestic violence, a whole range of issues, because we had people in the office who had that interest anyway and were in leadership positions. Later, it helped me with some of our civil rights work in affirmative action. I've strayed. But the 2-year point, it does seem to be your biggest challenge here, particularly if you're interested in public interest. And what I would argue to you is my goal is totally to get you to spend some part of your career in the public sector, is to do it in 2-year chunks. So if you've done it, you're not committing yourself for life. If you're in a private firm, you're trying to figure out, you stand back periodically and say, okay, am I getting enough out of this? Am I using this? Am I, for example, as in my private practice, getting some pro bono time? Am I spending some of my, this is not all one or the other. You could do a lot in a private firm in terms of the community, in terms of politics, in terms of working, trying to help with its good general counsel, with clients and others. I mean, there's lots of things you can do. It's not one or the other. The benefit, I close with this, I found is, I think professionally and personally, in terms of values and insight, if you've had experience in different sectors, you're better at doing that job you're in. I mean, the best prosecutors I had been public defenders or have been in private law firms. There are many very good ones who did nothing but prosecute, but the benefit hugely of having other perspectives was a major advantage. And I believe on the other side, the best corporate attorneys right now are people who have been prosecutors, former prosecutors. And it's not only that they aren't ideologically, they're not ideologically rigid, it's they also understand practically how the other side thinks. And strategically and tactically, that's a very important goal here as you go through. And finally, the biggest thing we need in our profession are advocates for the public interest. And there just are not enough systemic. Right now, I mean, I think it is an embarrassment that the legal profession is not a rabid advocate for greater expanse of legal services programs, public defender programs, AmeriCorps, all the institutions that would allow any student who wanted to participate in public interest practice to do that. Because as a profession we are committed to, even if individually we're not, we're committed professionally by our preamble to ensuring equal justice, equal access. We're ensuring that people, that people get legal services and defender services. And we absolutely do not provide that. And I think that it doesn't mean you're going to be perfect in doing this. But you've got, the profession ought to be major advocates. And the best advocates I've ever found come out of law firms, private firms, and invariably the leaders have spent some part of their life in the public sector and know that it wasn't just being charitable, wasn't just a pro bono, it was the best professional years of their life in many cases, and they want to replicate that for other people.
Okay, open the floor. People are going to be too shy.
If you don't ask me, I'll keep going. I'll just warn you. Judge Coffin starts.
Well, I'm going to open up because I think that there's a compliment here with our two guests. What you just said, Scott, Judge Coffin has just spent 2 years being co-chair of the Commission on Loan Repayment and Forgiveness that was set up by the ABA to deal with the question of law student debt. Look around the room. Student debt, and the impact that that's having on the ability of law students. How many people in this room, am I doing something? How many people in this room have more than $30,000 of debt? Or will graduate with more than $30,000? How many people in this room have more than $40,000 of debt? 50. Will have when you graduate, not this minute, when you graduate. And in Maine, the typical public interest salary is about $31,000. Judge Coffin?
That's why, as Scott said, I think it's a wonderful starting point to get to work either for a state or federal prosecutor or defender or a public interest firm like Pine. But you have to be independently wealthy if you're going to pay your $50,000 to, in many cases, it's now well over $100,000. Our studies show that sort of the average debt repayment requirement is about $1,000 a month. And if a Pine Tree legal got a salary of 33 or whatever, 35,000, has to pay 12,000 of that to fulfill his loan obligation. You just can't hack it. This is the problem we're going to have to live with. This is a terrible time for action to be taken. Our commission has a number of steps we would take to liberalize federal legislation, various loan funds, and choices of tax deductible mechanisms that can be used. We're not likely to get any of them in the short run. And we also have a toolkit showing states how they can initiate loan forgiveness programs so that loans can be forgiven during a period of tenure with a public interest job. States may adopt the program, but no state really has funded such a program as yet. And this looks like a very bad time for states.
So I view this as a serious obstacle, but nevertheless the goal is eminently worthwhile. I think that if a private firm is necessary for you to keep up your loan obligations, don't lose hope. I think any service in a private firm gives plenty of opportunity for public service. In my own case, I started out in Lewiston, and one of my earliest jobs was corporation counsel for the city. This was a part-time job for which I was paid the munificent sum of $2,000. But it was a way of getting into city government, knowing what ticks, knowing how people act and interact. And as Scott is saying, it gave me not only some stories that were better than my private counterparts, all the private counterparts were able to give, but it gave me a good maturing experience. I came to Portland and joined Darrell Maynard, and this at the time was a highly respected, small, well, it was, I guess, one of the two largest firms in the state, as perhaps it still is. We had 12 people in the firm. My partners were all Republicans. I was a Democrat. And my debt to them was that they gave me some latitude to follow my bent and work in politics. And I was at that time in close association with Ed Muskie. I was chairman of our party because the party was in such poor straits that they would take a neophyte like me and put me in the spot of state chairman. You know, I had a ball. And I owe a good part of it to my firm because I had the freedom there that I wouldn't have had I been a sole practitioner. I'm not sure they liked the result when the votes all came in and Muskie became governor, but even then it wasn't a disadvantage for the firm to have been associated with at least one member of the opposite party. So, and I think today in firms there are many other ways of evidencing your interest in the public service, but whatever you do, I fully second Scott's strong feeling. And to me it's heartening that you have a man like him who is going into this new field. I think, you know, several years ago, if you had any theme, several years ago, when we were thinking of the Coffin lecture, law and public service, we would never have thought of getting someone from the corporate field. So that I think the time is right, and you're perhaps once again the leader to lead us out of this wilderness.
The problem is, the precedent judges, every time I start a new career, the salary goes down. So I'm not sure that I'll probably be the first, you know, pro bono corporate governance expert. It's always. I wanted to echo one thing because I would like to have questions for people. But I do want to stress, and I don't want to get into my democracy speech with you, but I don't see the two as at all. I see them totally interrelated. As that was part of my speech last night. It is impossible to have a good either legal community, full-blown legal community, or a full-blown democracy without having sort of them interconnected. They are. They're sort of a foundational piece. And let me give you an example. The broad civics aspect is, in this democracy, our values and policies all get articulated through a political process. We can not participate and let others do it, or influence it that way, or participate, but that's the nature of a democracy. And it's so that I've always said to every group that cared about their constituents, professionals, I mean, if you don't speak for your clients, who's going to speak for your clients? I mean, your social workers, whether you care about the environment or consumers, if you don't get involved, who do you think is going to be involved? The special interests are involved, They do it better than any other reform group because they know why it matters to be involved in politics. They know why it matters to contribute to campaigns. They know, and they expect something in return, but that's entirely appropriate in democracy. The absence of the people on the other side who speak for the public interest, who sort of, for whatever reason, dropped out. Now, that's a little bit of speak. Let me get a second specific, though. Any one of you in this room, I could run for office. You may not want to run for office, but my experience was exactly Judge Coffin's, same as Judge Coffin's. I gradually met, my first experience in politics was working for a city council candidate in Cambridge. As a result of that, I made contacts I never have made any other way as a part of that campaign with other professionals, with other people. I think people in my campaigns, I would look around where they are now. I mean, I look around and see people who, because they were working, now, and you may want to think about it, people running, particularly for professional offices, DA, attorneys that don't run for AG in Massachusetts, in Maine. But a vehicle here is running for these, because you then come in contact with attorneys, you come in contact with other professionals, and you get a lot of responsibility, a lot of opportunity to do that. And that can best be done often out of a private sector law firm. Most law firms will allow you to spend some of your time in that kind of action and work it out. It's a way to keep your ties in to places where the action, and at the same time, you will actually, I think, begin to realize that you can make a difference in that sphere. And I think that's our greatest challenge with public interest, is that even in the politics has been that people don't think there's an opportunity to get started. It's why, without comment, the Howard Dean campaign impresses me at this point, because it's giving people who didn't feel they could have an impact, seem to feel they're having some impact. And I think a lot of this is habits, getting used to the habit of it. And the other thing with the judges talking about his era, I mean, I was benefited from being in a law firm when the judges' contemporaries were partners. And it was assumed that you would participate in some kind of, it was assumed that you would be involved publicly in a number of different things, because they saw that as a value to the firm. One of the challenges today is a little bit my generation, which is, if you're lucky to have some firms who've seen this, it does work, but there's too many of us that never did the mix of public-private practice. So, but there's no magic formula here, but in almost every case, you can do it. That's why, and I just say financially, I just want to emphasize, the next 5 years, if you look at this as an issue of paying off your loans, it will limit you. I mean, if you get one, great, but it will limit you. I mean, your goal is, if you're not careful here, you will limit your options, and it will be just what we're talking about in corporate America. It will be trying to get a short-term return and sacrificing a long-term investment. And this is very practical. This is not about nobility. This is not about having your life enhanced and feeling good about yourself. It's, where do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years, rather, what do you want to do for the next 2 years? And look at this investment you're making, your law firm alone, as a longer-term investment in your career. But that's, I mean, I know that sounds a little bit easier said than done, but it does help you give a time frame for what you're trying to look at here in terms of the finances. And I don't know, you know, it's an awful hard turn on $150,000 starting salary. I understand that.
We don't have many of those.
Since I never had that, he started at $2,000. I started at $8,500 for crown. We'll start war stories here, so if people have comments, please. For Judge Coffin or me.
It's not that. I know these people. They're braver than this.
We kill in 3 years.
So if you are interested in getting started in public interest, not just in Maine, but other places, how do you go about it?
That is, for me, the hardest question. Because, I mean, I think this is the most frustrating thing I've encountered in the last 5 years. It was frustrating when I was AG or DA, but at least I could say apply to the DA's office in Middlesex County. You know, when I was there, I'd say at least try us. You know, we believe in recruiting entry-level people and all that kind of thing, and for lots of reasons, or new people that did. But this is very frustrating to me, and it's why I think that part of this is a systemic political issue. For whatever reason, we have decided that we're not providing easy access to these kinds of jobs. So I do two things. One is I say to people, first of all, you shouldn't be applying. You should I'll put this on tape, so I'll be careful here. I think you are entitled to apply to a law firm, and as long as it's not a single practitioner who has chosen you and therefore excluded 25 other people. If you keep looking for a public interest job, a clerkship or something of that type, it is a situational ethic that you are entitled to do that. That is, I think you can have it, try to have it both ways. That is, in one sense, since the vehicles that offer you opportunities right now are private law firms, whether it's the interview or other process, you can play that role while at the same time keeping an eye out for the public interest jobs that sometimes don't come in until near the end of your third year, don't come in until the next year. Now, the argument to law firms I would make is, I've never seen a major law firm deny somebody a job because they got a federal court clerkship. If they got to clerk for Judge Coffin, they'd hold that position for them for a year or 2 years if they got to do it. And I think that's some of the same argument I would make here. The second is, there are some good sites. If you can't access it otherwise, I'm sure people here do a great job. But the Harvard Law School Public Interest Office has a website that is available for anybody in terms of looking for public interest jobs, and they sort of pride themselves on the fact that they make it available to everybody to look at. And I always urge people, and law schools even, to tap into it. Why not? They have the money. I mean, you know, and and all it is a network that gives you opportunities to check that out. The third one's the toughest one, is volunteering. But you know, if all else fails, I mean, there is a part of me which is that a lot of jobs come up in public sector, nonprofit, or other places for people they know. And it's not patronage or anything else. It's you get to be known, and I'd say for the next year and a half, by the way, I think I would look strongly for some of your political campaigns as a way to find some vehicle to get to know some connections, particularly with New Hampshire right next door, with some other things going on in these campaigns right now. It's not a bad time to be looking around to that kind of involvement. The volunteering is a way to get into places, to get to know people. And the other place to do it is you tap these outstanding, I mean, because you've got some great law professors here who have networked all over the country. Question.
Also, for lack of anything more definite, if you're in a private law firm, a firm of any size, there should be, I think Scott would say, you're entitled to, and under the ABA policy and principle, every lawyer should spend a significant percentage of his or her time in pro bono work. Now, the pro bono work this is a wide range of things. We found that one of the greatest needs in Maine was people who knew family law, and most of the firms, big firms in Portland, were not very good at that. Very few people knew anything about it. What they finally did, the leading firms here chipped in, and they paid for 2 persons who worked with Pine Tree on family law. That's only a drop in the bucket. If you, as a private firm lawyer, want to find out where you can do a lot of good, it is to go into fields like that and make yourself an expert in that field or other one. Immigration is another field. And there are, of course, public interest groups. There's an immigration group in Maine. You would be I'm sure that if you knew anything about the field, you would be an A1 candidate for a board of director position in that organization. And while that doesn't pay, it certainly is a significant contribution. The same would be true of Equal Justice, which is your alumna Rebecca Smith is a staunch member of this small but very significant legal services. And a senior attorney at one of the big firms, Roger Putnam, is on the important man in the board of directors, and he is getting his kicks out of doing that as well as making another contribution. So both service itself on a pro bono basis and the service as an advisor and outside director, these are satisfactions. While you're waiting for the perfect job to open up.
What I wanted to ask to follow on that, I mean, is the issue here, I want to be clear what the issue is. The issue that it's the lack of public jobs, or that it's also involved tricky finding the private law firm jobs? I mean, I suppose it's both, maybe it's both here. I mean, so that people are not necessarily sitting in a position where they know they're going to go to a firm, and the only question is then how do you sort of keep your ties open? And which is the judge's comments, and anybody that has that, I mean, that's absolutely crucial. And furthermore, I would make the argument, just forget all the benefits of pro bono work. The more contacts you make, the more clients you're going to get, the more marketing you're going to do, I mean, for your firm and yourself. I mean, it is also helping you very selfishly identify a whole lot of other possible avenues that are worth connecting with. But therefore, if it's not a question of the private firm, then I would make a serious pitch for the volunteer, because that's how you get the expertise. I mean, you should make every effort you can. If you want to be lawyers, you got to practice law in some vehicle, some device. Now, I happen to think that good public service jobs, legislative jobs are good public service jobs. Every legislator is looking for a good policy help, some help, volunteer, other bases. You get on the train, you take your settle down to Washington, D.C., and you start walking around the hill and talk to, you get Olympia Snow and Susan Collins and these folks, and get them on the phone and say, you want to meet people down in Washington, you want to get out and visit, you're coming down. And we'd like to see some people. You go get David to get his son, who's in Partnership for Public Service, which is Max Steers, a heavily funded group that people are surprisingly don't know much about. The partnership got a ton of money to try to find people who would apply for federal jobs, because over the next 5 years, 50% of the federal workforce is turning over. So the Partnership for Public Service is an access point for public service jobs in the federal level. And so that you want to look at where the potential jobs are here. And I think I also think that the in-house, we talked about it in the last class, but I never have done as much as I should have of reminding people about other companies. He started in a municipal corporation counsel job. Every municipality, every city has some kind of corporate law department. I mean, and my course at Harvard was all about gearing people to they look at state government jobs, state prosecutors, district attorney's office, municipal counsel. The range of things municipal counsel today handles rivals any general counsel job in the private sector and any state attorney general's office most of the time. Every kind of law, tort, and that's the second. So the relevance of that then is to look at places like that that give you expertise as well as giving you interest in doing something in the public sector. I don't believe this is about public jobs become vehicles for getting those other jobs. That's how most people I know got into private law firms, actually. Other questions or comments? Yes.
Is there any particular, I know we're talking about starting private and going to public sector, what's looking at, is there any, for those of us who have a shorter career ahead of us, is there any order that's better than the other?
I'm just started. Private sector, you can't look, if you look around the room here, you do feel old. I always feel old, but
They don't.
is your question, what do you, in terms of the sphere, what do you want to try to do in the next 10 years? What do you want to do? What would you like to do in the ideal world? Where would you like to be in 10 years?
I want your job.
Which one of I? The paying job, the paying Harshbarger job? Okay.
But I mean, if you're particularly interested in corporate governance and corporate accountability issues that are really coming to
Okay, if I were looking at the next 10 years here, I would go where I'm going to go at 2:30. down the corporate library, in the corporate library board, which is it's right now the thing amongst and domino start. It's becoming the corporate governance, research and accountability place. So it's right here in Florida. Corporate library. I'm going down there at 2:30. Secondly, Bob Monks and Rick Bennett are doing some similar thing here, and I know some discussions are occurring about possible joint program in corporate governance between the law and the business school, right here in Maine. And that's you happen to have it right here in terms of one place to look. The second is I would not write off this general counsel world right now at all. I think, and actually, I mean, I was going to say that I think I haven't touted it quite as much, but I looked at the number of lawyers I know in I mean, I forget the numbers, a huge number that are actually in-house counsel in either major corporations or small corporations. And you know, that's sort of an evolving area that evolve, and there's a whole association of folks. There's also a whole growing world of corporate compliance people now. The Ethics Officers Association has a website. I mean, there's an increasing area here of people, and there's a corporate, for those of you who know, there's an American Corporate Counsel Association that exists with a website. I mean, everybody has a website, what am I saying? I grew up with rotary phone days, just in case. So the avenues, I think that those are the avenues that I begin to look at, would be to see where you could go to get sort of experience like that. Now, if we're right here, I'm not sure what that experience is exactly. I mean, but I think you're trying to get in some way, how do you do compliance work? How do you think about ethics within a corporate culture? How do you get to advise a board? Now that then goes to Judge Coffin's suggestion. You know, one of the things that many people have never done is worked on boards. As surprising as that is, the principles are the same here that's applied. I mean, if you want to talk about where the next examination is going to be again, is going to be on non-profit boards. I mean, people who have been sitting there and doing nothing, they're on it because they're fundraisers, they're on it because it's honorific, not because they're really working at this. I mean, it gives you experience, which then becomes relevant. Interestingly, most banks in Massachusetts encourage, the big banks that still exist, encourage their employees, they have programs to encourage their employees to serve on boards of nonprofit corporations or serve on boards, so that the corporate sector is not one to walk away from here quite as lightly as I think we've tended to, because for whatever reason it seemed to have to come from sort of a different background. If I'm right at all, I mean, I think the next few years, the real opportunity to have an impact may well occur within that sort of culture. And but again, you're going to be more appealing if you have some experience and expertise and have thought about that kind of thing. But that's what I would begin to look at, is that setting for those kind of jobs.
It's kind of a hybrid of public interest and private.
Now, well, I mean, look, McKinnon says, I'm saying it's a hybrid now because I want to believe that there's a chance I'm having an impact as well as selling out. You know, I mean, we're talking about this. If Dean asked me to tell you how this was a seamless web, you know, my career just meshes nicely with this. The part I would say is that I'd say, no, I'm very lucky. I view myself as very lucky. I mean, I have. And I went.
She's worried about this being a webless scene.
Yes. The thing here is that I've been lucky to be in situations that are challenging professionally, and that sort of push you to do that. But where you're based on you're using your legal background is really the framework. I mean, for me, as opposed to the judge, I think, I mean, the judge has done all these public things, but also I think really loves the law. Okay, I think there's no doubt about that. I'd have to be a big stretch for me to say that I love the law. I mean, I love being a lawyer because of the opportunities it's given me in systems and to make change and to use it as a vehicle for equal justice and equal protection, broadly speaking, and to have that kind of an impact. I mean, I think I would argue that's the benefit of going to law school. It keeps your options open. You really have, and you cannot discuss any issue in our society today without understanding the law, no matter what role you're in. And those of you that are here because you were victimless advocates and social workers and got tired of lawyers getting the job and the promotions are here because you're trying to get add to that experience. So I think that the law gives you that it's the problem with it, but it also is the great opportunity. I mean, there are a range of opportunities you get by this background you're getting now. And I think the way to think about the law school is that you're preparing yourself for a platform of how to solve problems, how to mediate disputes, how to give good and solid advice and judgment. You're really not preparing to be the best tax lawyer. You'll get to be the best tax lawyer when 5 years from now you find you love the tax law and you happen to be in the right place and you get a chance to do lots of those cases. But in the meantime, you're trying to keep your options open.
What was your favorite job of all the ones you had?
My favorite job?
Besides the one you have now?
No, it was, being Attorney General was, and the reasons for it were that it was sort of it was a classic progression. I mean, all the other jobs had prepared me for, in Massachusetts, the Attorney General's office, which was, by definition, outstanding and it was seen as the best politics were to be, the best profession you could be. It was a 500-person office. We represent all the state agencies, so we had that defensive function to be able to be strategic advice and counsel. We had independent power to do environmental, consumer, civil rights. So the AG's office in Massachusetts is sort of one of those ideally situated offices with the power. So all the experience that I had, Colleen, up to that sort of prepared you to lead that. The second piece was you did it in a network. This is the geographical choice that I think was lucky fortuitously. I stayed in one place and had all these different jobs within the same legal network, so that you had the ties and that enabled you to be honest, they would tend to attract the best students. I mean, we had the reputation helped you get your friends to refer the best people they knew. The political people wanted to refer me people, but they would only refer the best people they could, because they worried about the other, because the law that we had, the reputation was established. And then you got to use the law in a very affirmative way. And I think that I also think, as much as I did that 8 years was, I mean, given in Massachusetts, we had no tenure, no civil service issues, so I could really literally, I had no excuse not to change, to make the office, shape the office in my image, if you will. And I had done a big action plan for what I wanted to do, and thought we should touch everybody's life every way. And it was, and I was only that, and I also realized when I got to Common Cause, as much as I loved that job, I had been really spoiled as a leader. I had exceptional people working for me who really made me look really good, and and the public sector, where the only limitation we saw wasn't excellence. It was the expectation of excellence, that you had to be the best you could, and you had to be in the right place, and you get a chance to do lots of those cases, but in the meantime, you're trying to keep your options open.
What was your favorite job of all the ones you had?
My favorite job?
Besides the one you have now?
No, it was, being Attorney General was, and the reasons for it were that it was sort of it was a classic progression. I mean, all the other jobs had prepared me for, in Massachusetts, the Attorney General's office, which was, by definition, outstanding and it was seen as the best politics were to be, the best profession you could be. It was a 500-person office. We represent all the state agencies, so we had that defensive function to be able to be strategic advice and counsel. We had independent power to do environmental, consumer, civil rights. So the AG's office in Massachusetts is sort of one of those ideally situated offices with the power. So all the experience that I had, Colleen, up to that sort of prepared you to lead that. The second piece was you did it in a network. This is the geographical choice that I think was lucky fortuitously. I stayed in one place and had all these different jobs within the same legal network, so that you had the ties and that enabled you to be honest, they would tend to attract the best students. I mean, we had the reputation helped you get your friends to refer the best people they knew. The political people wanted to refer me people, but they would only refer the best people they could, because they worried about the other, because the law that we had, the reputation was established. And then you got to use the law in a very affirmative way. And I think that I also, though, think, as much as I did that 8 years was, I mean, given in Massachusetts, because we had no tenure, no civil service issues, so I could really literally, I had no excuse not to change, to make the office, shape the office in my image, if you will. And I had done a big action plan for what I wanted to do, and thought we should touch everybody's life every way. And it was, and I was only that, and I also realized when I got to Common Cause, as much as I loved that job, I had been really spoiled as a leader. I had exceptional people working for me who really made me look really good, and and we had, and the public sector, where the only limitation we saw wasn't excellence, it was the expectation of excellence, that you had to be the best you could be, that it wasn't enough just to care about the environment, you had to care about the environment, you had to be the best environmental lawyer. I mean, that was the key to the job, and that tended to create a dynamic with, so I thought I did the best job as a leader, but I also realized I did it because I had people who reflected back my values. Now, that's the best. The next challenge, and I'll never have a better job, and that's also been reflected by Bill Clinton said that as Attorney General from Arkansas. Joe Lieberman has said that in Connecticut. And the reason is, it's because it's a political elected job, but it is the one job you get that the best politics is to do the right thing. Now think about that. I mean, in a way, that's what you got to do as Attorney General. As an elected official, I was independent, I had discretion, and the politics were to do the best job you could. Was that you got, it's one of those jobs that you do the right thing. It's also the problem in running for governor, being Attorney General, because the people you have indicted specifically remember, and they don't care that you were fair, responsible, professional. You made their life hard. The next phase, I think, would have been a great challenge, and so that's sort of the next. I'm lucky to have a second, third phase to my life, but that was a great job, but it was also the sort of culmination of all this stuff. And all the talents of people in this room. That was great.
Now the Tom Ward's coming in, we're going to recreate the famous tackle. So, I announced that you had tackled Scott at an earlier point in your respective lives.
I was a mid player on a lousy team, a star on a great team. And for one 15-minute moment, the Suns were reversed.
I just turned around.
Everybody gets like 15 minutes in the Suns.
I had asked Tom and Scott if, if this were a good day, which it is, whether they would replay this.
With surrogates.
Maybe you could raise money for the capital campaign by selling chances or something.
It would take us 15 minutes to recreate it for crying out loud.
Any other questions? No?
For someone whose interests
Double dipper?
For someone whose interests aren't necessarily aligned with what people think is a traditional public interest job, what would you suggest?
Well, give me that one again.
There are some interests that naturally lead themselves to public interest jobs, but there are some interests that seem sort of contrary, like partnership taxation. So what would you suggest?
Partnership.
Taxation. Woman after my own heart.
So what would you suggest for somebody that has an interest in something like tax, but still wants to do some public interest?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I think that, let me just flick it back to the answer the AG question. The thing I find to be the greatest problem in my experience in the public life and nonprofit world is the acceptance of less than the best. That is, many times it's because of resources. We just don't have the resources. But I find it intolerable that we accept less than the best professional standards we can. And far too many groups do that. Therefore, therefore, excellence. I've always thought that having the best is more important in the public sector and the nonprofit world, because you are the vehicle for people who without you have no one getting something done. And it's almost more of a burden on you. You've got to be more efficient. You've got to be more effective. You've got to try. It's not tolerable to be anything else. So you try to attract the best and do that. Now that's why the tax specialties, I think one of the most important projects that we started in Boston over the last year or two, which I'm afraid is an economic justice project, which is trying to get corporate law firms to provide advice and assistance to minority and small businesses who they don't need. It's not a small business association. They don't need $250,000 loan. They know how to handle basic tax and other guidance. What is fascinating for me is the best job this wonderful person who edited did was to translate. The lawyers knew the law. They couldn't talk to people. They had no way of talking. This wasn't even, they don't know how to talk to most clients, but they did not know how to talk to a Hispanic entrepreneur trying to run a hairdressing place and figure out how to do it. They didn't know how to talk to them. They were scared stiff. They felt, though, really good once they did learn how to talk. And that's what so my answer to you is, those